Hey, I'm Ellie. Thanks for joining me today. I want you to hear a quote that you might never have heard before, or maybe you have. I guess we'll find out in a moment. Here's the quote, and it goes, "This is what it's like when a species prepares to depart for the stars." That's a beautiful quote. That line, if you haven't heard it before, comes from Terence McKenna. And that quote is going to be at the heart of today's show. It's a really poetic line, but it's more than that. Let me repeat it to you. It goes, "This is what it's like when a species prepares to depart for the stars." That quote captures something many of us are quietly feeling right now, that sense of being between two worlds. We're standing kind of at the edge of something that we can't fully name and understand. We aren't really back in the past where we were, say, 10 years ago, but we're not really sure what to expect from the future as well. And that is a perfect poem to describe our current state of being. Terence McKenna wasn't a prophet in the traditional sense. He was a philosopher, but he was also probably one of the most eloquent voices to come out of the psychedelic movement. He loved his mushrooms, man. And McKenna's ideas were bold and very strange, but they struck really deep. In his final interview, which took place in 1998, and it was just 2 years before he ultimately died from brain cancer, McKenna spoke with a lot of clarity about the chaos that is unfolding around us and what might lie beyond that chaos. McKenna didn't see chaos as a breakdown, but as a kind of a preparation for something new, like a birth or a species preparing to depart for the stars, like he said. He wasn't talking about spaceships or anything like that. He was talking about consciousness, about a transformation so intense and layered that it would affect not just humans, but every single living organism on the planet. The idea that he had that we're living through a kind of evolutionary threshold isn't just philosophy anymore, because people are talking about it everywhere, and we're beginning to feel it as well. It's showing up in our family life, in our workplace, in relationships, and in the quiet ways that people are kind of waking up and walking away from things that no longer seem to fit them or resonate with them anymore. Some people are asking questions that they never had the courage to ask until now, and some are grieving things that seem to have been lost from the past that they thought were secure back then. And then people are out there are also people out there who are pulled towards something new, but they can't quite explain what that new thing is. All they know is that they can feel that pull. Well, this episode today begins with that concept, not with predictions or timelines or anything like that, but with this shared kind of sense, this shared feeling that something is changing. And it's very, very personal. It's emotional and it's personal. And it's showing up in real life. So I'm not just talking about things like headlines or what you see on TV or hear in social media or anything like that. But it's how we feel love towards one another and how we listen to one another, how we try to make sense of strange times that are taking place that we're living in right now. Well, Terence McKenna believed of this concept called novelty, and he believed that it wasn't necessarily a good or a bad thing. It's just what happens when life evolves. And when it happens, it starts to happen pretty fast, and it gets faster and faster because novelty becomes old news very quickly. It has to be replaced with more novelty. And so it begins to feel really overwhelming. But it also might be what ultimately wakes us up. So think of novelty as being something where you're constantly on the search for something new and more radical and more exciting. Can you imagine as you become conditioned to accept novelty into your life, it will come faster and faster and faster until it gets to the point where you almost feel as though you're spinning. That's kind of what people are feeling like right now. So let's sit with that for a second. It's weird. So let's sit with the weirdness. It's really intense. So let's hang around with that intensity for a minute. The fact that this is what it feels like when a species like us is sitting here means something's about to change. Not calmly, not cleanly. We don't just sort of open a door and there's our future. But something has to come to overwhelm our current existence and collapse it in a way so that there's nothing left but to move forward. And that's what Terence McKenna was talking about. At the moment, people are talking about the world being really chaotic. And we often are looking at that chaos through news reports or some talking head who's telling us how we should be feeling about it. But the real chaos that's taking place is much quieter. It's actually far more personal because it's happening inside us. It may be manifesting as a kind of a strange tension that is showing up in our relationships or even just inside us, but our daily routines are affected by it and how we make decisions. Also, these are quiet things that other people may not even know are happening, but they're happening inside us. Terence McKenna described it as a kind of rising level of contradiction. He used the word excruciating to describe it because it does become quite excruciating at a certain point in time. And it's easy to see why when we look at it more closely. So right now, many people are sitting in a space between the traditions of reality that no longer seem to fit and the ideas of a future that haven't been fully formed yet. So they're kind of abstract in nature. And for many people, this is a really disorienting and confusing and maybe even exhausting place to be sitting right now. So, for example, inside families, things that used to be really solid might be starting to unravel. You know, those family relationships and the dynamic is changing. Some people, particularly if they are from the earlier generations, are becoming fearful perhaps about all of the rapid changes that are taking place around them. But at the same time, younger people in those same families might be pushing towards a kind of freedom and that kind of change that has no real stability. So if younger people are looking for a lack of stability and older people are accustomed to the stability, then there's this chaotic energy happening inside the family. Like a practical example is how so many people who are younger are quite comfortable owning very little and renting everything. They don't believe they will ever own their own home, so why bother saving up for one? But older generations, they know that sense of stability that home ownership brings you. The younger generation may not care for the idea of stability though, because they have a different worldview. Sometimes it feels like people in the same family are now speaking different languages. And that's just one example. And then in other wider relationships outside of the family, people are craving truth and authenticity. A lot of what we do now is very surface level. All of our interactions are very much on the surface. And the old days of having a best friend for life or staying in touch with everyone from school is starting to dissolve. It's not really as common now as it used to be. People are moving away from established jobs, or they're no longer willing to wear that kind of costume of who they're supposed to be or who people expect them to be. And they might even be moving homes more frequently or moving across the country or to other countries, moving away from their local community, the community that they grew up with. Everything is really fluid and nothing is really staying the same like it used to. This is something that happened because of COVID in particular, that people, they just, you know, after spending all of this time at home and isolated and restricted, the funny thing is people started thinking for the first time sometimes because suddenly they weren't busy. And when they started thinking, they began to realize they don't want to betray themselves anymore. They want to follow their heart rather than just maintain what has always been expected of them. And I've got my hand up because you know what? I started this channel during COVID, during the very first lockdown that we experienced. It was a 6-week lockdown that happened in the early part of 2020. And that's kind of what happened to me, is I did it part-time and I continued to own my business. And I don't know how I did it because I had a 7-day-a-week business and I was producing at one point a video every single day of the week while I had my 7-day-a-week business. But I did it without sleep. And if you look at really early videos, you can tell that I hadn't slept. But that's what happened to me, is I started to morph into something else, or someone else, because I started to feel as though what I was doing before was a betrayal of who I was and that this was who I really was. There are millions of people out there who are exactly like that. What it means, though, is that we can't count on everything always staying the same anymore. Change is the dominant aspect of the current day, of the current world. In spiritual life, people are questioning everything. And it's not like they're being rebellious or anything like that. They just want, actually, I think it's more than want. I think they have a really deep, deep desire for something real. And the old way of praying to a God, for example, who is abstract and unknowable, and he might be a good guy and he might be a bad guy, it just feels really hollow. The more separated we become physically because of things like technology, the more we crave physical and tangible understanding of things. And the true meaning that is really alive and fierce and completely undeniable. Even something like dreams. Well, even our dreams are starting to change lately. And this is a concept that I threw out in a recent video. I actually told you guys that my dreams have been changing. There's more symbolism, more strange messaging, and the dreams seem a little bit more urgent. I don't mean like negative urgent. It's not in a negative way. It's more like a sense that I'm processing something much bigger than my own personal story. And the response I got from you in the comments of that video were incredible. Actually, I think it may have been 2 back-to-back videos where I talked about it. There were so many people who just sort of said yes with a big exclamation point, and they didn't realize it was happening to more people than just themselves. At this moment in time, it feels like we're standing at the threshold of something major, a hallway with many doors. And one of those doors, maybe even all of those doors, is just about to open. So there are lots of symbols and metaphors that humanity has been using to describe reality since the beginning of whatever we've been able to find so far through, discovery and archaeology and science. And I'm going to talk about some of these because one of these may actually resonate with you and help you to put words to that sense of feeling that you have at the moment, which is part of this novelty theory belonging to Terence McKenna. The first one is the spiral analogy. And the spiral analogy is not a simple path forward of movement for humanity. It's more like a spiraling, turning inward and spiraling into something new. But in order to do that, we kind of revisit familiar patterns and we remember things from the past that hurt us and helped us to grow. Because with those experiences from the past, as we spiral back, we kind of emerge with a new perspective that was only possible because of our past experiences. That's the point where we're kind of growing and ascending through that spiral. It's not a linear kind of transition. It curves and it tightens and then it kind of releases us so that we can continue spiraling. And through repetition of that spiral, we're finally beginning to see all the things that spiral has been teaching us in our past. So that's one kind of analogy. You might be feeling that spiral effect. We also have another analogy that I can draw from, and that's the flood analogy. And in this instance, whatever we try to suppress eventually rises to the surface. So emotions begin to spill out, the things that we use to camouflage away so that we didn't have to display them. Well, that kind of starts to collapse as well. It feels like we're drowning a lot of the time. But the thing about being immersed in water is that even if it feels dangerous, what it's really doing is it's washing us clean. The flood analogy is all about washing away the falseness, and what remains after that big washdown of a flood is nothing but the truth. Which kind of reminds me of something, actually. Whenever I hear that phrase, drain the swamp, and I think we've all heard that phrase, drain the swamp, I actually don't think of draining the swamp as being a positive thing. I'm going to tell you. The reason for that is because when you drain something, you're losing all of the cleansing water. And the only thing you're left with is all the muck and the grime that was diluted with water. And I think it would make a lot more sense to flood the swamp. Because if you're injecting massive amounts of beautiful, pure cleansing water, then you're pushing all that muck away and overwhelming it with something greater. I mean, that's just me. It might be just one of those little silly things that make me wonder why I latch onto these things, but I do. And I think about it every single time I hear that phrase, just something to think about. So that's the flood analogy. If you feel as though you're drowning, remember that the water is a cleansing element that actually is a necessary part of being whole and clean. And if there's enough of it, it can push that muck away and leave you with something beautiful and pure and clean. So there's another analogy that I thought might be helpful for people who are experiencing this chaos of novelty theory as we're kind of on the edge of something new. And that is the threshold analogy. And this is where we're standing right here, and our transformation is waiting for us. We're kind of being asked to trust what we can't see and to just step into the new. It's a very hard thing for people to do. So most people just cling as tightly as they can to the status quo. They might be fighting it, but they're fighting what they know, with the power given to them by what they know. The threshold is all about releasing ourselves from what we know and trusting that if we step into the unknown, it will unfold exactly as it should. It might be uncertain, but it's also very exciting and it has a lot of promise ahead of it. And then the final metaphor that I found was the vortex analogy, which is similar to the threshold but a bit different. And this is when something seems so very chaotic from the outside, but once we step inside, it becomes very clear. It kind of pulls us into a sense of authenticity and it strips away all of the illusions. And it reveals the truth beneath many of the narratives that we've inherited. So even though something looks chaotic, if we just allow it to be and step inside it, we'll find that the answer is waiting for us there. I use all of these metaphors from time to time in the various videos that I bring to the channel here. And they all ring true, the spiral and the flood and the threshold and the vortex. You can use whatever it is that works for you, whatever resonates to help you to understand. The one that resonates might be the one that feels right, but they're all symbols about what's happening around us right now in this chaotic kind of environment. And they're all good ways of describing this massive mythic kind of scale of change that's taking place around us, combining climate change and war and mass migrations and identity crisis and polarization and so many other things. There are so many other examples of what's happening around us that feel like chaos. But instead of focusing on that particular example, instead of focusing on the chaos, it's really important to see beyond those examples into a bigger picture. Because when you look at everything combined without judgment, it all points to a single thing. And that is that our reality, just like Terence McKenna said, our reality is dissolving right before our eyes. And that's the fundamental reason why we all ache for something real, something authentic. We want to belong to something new, because we can feel that the old is dissolving. So we've entered the age of Aquarius. It's a time of collective awakening, intuitive alignment, and emotional honesty. We might not use those words specifically, but something like that is happening inside us. It's telling us something. Things are uncomfortable and they're disorienting because they're dissolving. They can't change unless they dissolve first. You can't be new until the old has died. That's just the way it is. And that's because there's no transformation without change. So if you're feeling overwhelmed or like things don't quite make sense anymore, don't worry, because you're not alone. It's more than just an upheaval. It's a kind of an initiation that's taking place, a ritual, I guess you could say. But it certainly is like an initiation that is a necessary part of the shift into something new. And when Terence McKenna spoke to his magic mushrooms, they responded, apparently, and they told him that everything will happen faster and faster as we move closer to the end of the old and the beginning of the new. And it will increasingly look like more and more chaos, because it is a kind of chaos. But chaos is a necessary part of dissolving the process. It's our various stages of evolutionary shift, and it must take place in our emotional lives, in things like family and work and relationships, in order to bring us with it. Otherwise, if it didn't happen inside us, we would be getting left behind. And so think of it in a very positive way. If the chaos didn't include us, it means we're not included in the future. I think that those must have been some very clever mushrooms that Terence McKenna was talking to. By the way, I don't do mushrooms, just to confirm. So Terence McKenna also talked about this time as being that period of novelty. And we often think of novelty as something like entertainment, but that's not what he meant. He meant that novelty works a bit like a trickster spirit or an interstellar comet or some kind of weird concoction that a witch doctor might give you when you're feeling unwell. So for example, the trickster spirit might create sparks of surprise. It might invoke momentary shock. But what it's doing is it's kind of breaking a spell. It's loosening up our sense of stability. And then the interstellar comet, which I've talked about recently with the 3I Atlas comet that's coming our way. Well, that's an ancient entity or ancient object that carries unknown properties that might shake up our entire understanding that we've always held before it arrived. And it could end up reframing everything we thought we knew. And then, of course, the witch doctor's weird concoction that might taste really foul, and it might even make us feel a bit sick or strange for a while. But mostly that's because it's soul-based medicine that's administered for the purpose of loosening trauma that is held inside our spiritual self or our root chakra. And it actually recalibrates our immunity defenses in that way. It might be painful to take the witch doctor's concoction, but pain is part of the solution, which is the reason why it's so awful at the time. And what makes the current day fit perfectly with the McKenna mushroom generated theories of novelty is how dense the change is that's taking place right now. The change that's happening around us, it's everywhere. So simple examples that we hear about all the time, artificial intelligence is challenging what it means to think. That's a massive change. And people are completely redesigning themselves and what they stand for and who they want to be known as. People are dreaming about their ancestors, or they're dreaming about their past lives, or they're recalling memories that they didn't even know that they had before. And even things like gender and identity is being redefined. New words are emerging to describe us, like liminal, plural, or non-binary. And it's not just labeling that's taking place here. It's like we're being invited to live outside of the previous framework of what it means to be human. And there's also been this growing movement since at least the 1990s that I'm aware of, but it probably started even earlier than that. People want to live off the grid. They want to detach themselves from things like, the usual emotional attachments that people have always been associated by, or they completely oppose paying taxes. They don't even think there should be any taxes. They don't even think any kind of government structure should exist at all. They don't want to be married, or they don't want to have children, all kinds of things that used to be part of that standard that was being held up as a benchmark for humans in the past. It could be different for everyone, but there's so many things that people just do not want anymore. And that's part of this growing movement of change that's been taking place for quite a while. Personally, not that long ago, I met a woman when I was visiting Turkey who lived in the middle of a field surrounded by about 100 dogs. She rescued strays, because there are many strays in Turkey, and someone had let her use their land, and she put up a caravan, and then she just lived there with 100 dogs, all by herself. And I would say she probably had the best home alarm system that money could buy. Can you imagine if anyone ever decided to come and visit? The madness, the absolute madness, but also the adorableness as well, to be surrounded by dogs. And apparently, from what she said, they all got along with each other as well. So they certainly weren't human. And of course, we also have this resurgence of the feminine that appears to be happening as well. Enhanced tuition, a kind of rebalancing of our perspective. And yes, I'm a moon sign, I'm a Cancerian, and so perhaps this was always the way it was for me. But lately, I feel as though I've kind of rediscovered the moon or something. I'm very aware of it every night, more than I ever remember being in the past. So yeah, that's the novelty. Novelty is the chaos, and it can manifest in a billion different ways, which is the reason why even this video has a sense of novelty about it. It's increasing in speed and it's increasing in volume. And the more we encounter it, the harder it becomes to feel safe and secure and to orient ourselves. Instead, we feel as though we're flooded with choices and dilemmas and conflicts, and it's all very overwhelming. It might even feel threatening to some people. But if you see it through Terence McKenna's eyes, it's not a mistake or an accident, and it's kind of like, it is a collapse, but it's an initiation process. And that's the reason why it exists, because it's necessary for anyone at the cusp of transformation to recognize that they can't continue hanging on to the past. They can't continue to hang on to what feels safe. Because if they do, then they'll be left behind. They won't be able to transform. The whole point of a transformation is to let go. It's the voice of the unknown saying, come closer, come closer. Something real is waiting for you right on the other side. So let's do a visual exercise. All you need to do is remain still and close your eyes and let the images of this scene come to you, which I'm going to describe. Imagine that you're waking up in a crumbling house. The walls are warping around you and they're falling in to themselves. The familiar paintings that you had on the walls are peeling off and the picture frames are smashing as they fall to the floor. It's like the house has gone a bit mad. And the more you see it, the more it sparks your emotions. Those sparks ignite a candle, and that candle ignites the curtains. And then suddenly the whole crazy, wonky, warping house is also on fire. The old ways that you always relied upon are starting to melt because you can see that what you thought was solid, your house, is actually a madhouse that you've been living in all this time with warped mirrors and wonky floors. It's not literal, but it's a metaphor for our social conditioning. And now it's on fire. As the fire begins to grow and until it starts to rage, you stand there and you may be in shock. But what do you do now? Because your house is on fire. You might be frightened. You might be deeply uncomfortable. But your ancient, unshakable, primal instinct is what's going to take over. And it tells you that your house is mad. You're in a madhouse and your house is on fire. And it tells you that you need to get out of the house. And so you do. You drop the misconception that this house will always be the same. And you release yourself from the house. And the moment you do, you're instantly safe because now you're free. So here are some real examples of how this might be manifesting for you or for someone that you know. Because I know that I've been talking about novelty throughout this video and it sounds confusing and abstract and crazy and just a bit bananas because of course it all came from a magic mushroom that somehow Terence McKenna had a relationship with. But there are some really practical ways in which it's manifesting that have very simple solutions. All we need to do is understand them. So in one example, a parent is watching their child embrace queerness or alternative type of spirituality, and it feels a bit like a dissonance, a really fiery dissonance. It may look like they've lost their tradition and there's something that has been lost here, or it might look like a disrespect or a defiance of expectation. But that fire that the parent feels, like the madhouse that's on fire in that visualization, it can actually purify this situation if they let it. And if they let go and release themselves from that burning house that they can feel, the only thing left is love, which is unconditional and respects the child's sovereignty. That's one example. In another example, partners who've been together for a very long time, who once defined their connection to each other because they had a shared ideology. It might be religion or family values or status or politics or whatever. I mean, who knows? They start to rediscover each other through a new lens. They might not be the same anymore. They may have diverged in their viewpoint and in their ideology. But the thing is, there is no script for life. And so the fire has been burning now. And you let it burn. And what remains is respect and freedom of choices. People can still be partners, even if they're not the same, even if they don't believe the same things. And then in the final example, someone who was a very clear, passive kind of consumer. They were very obedient. They kept the stock market alive with all their purchasing, and they spent their money on stuff, on whatever stuff they could to be able to do their part for the status quo. And that form of consumerism and shopping is a form of dopamine. So it was kind of a way to keep them under control and feeling reasonably settled. So I guess they were calming themselves by taking the dopamine fix and shopping and ignoring those rising debts that were beginning to surround them. But suddenly they realized that the stuff doesn't actually satisfy them. So they closed their credit cards and they moved to a cabin in the woods, or they moved to a commune, or they moved to an emerging nation on the other side of the world. They decide that the fire burnt a hole in their need for stuff. And so they go in search of their true community where they can live vibrantly without the artificial dose of dopamine or the massive credit card debt. So when we look at the current world of chaos through Terence McKenna's eyes, the fire that's burning isn't so much a collapse. It's like a form of alchemy. And as that fire burns through the veil, we begin to see beyond the veil, through that hole that's being burnt by the fire. to a place where we can start a brand new story and rewrite it for ourselves. These days, it feels really strange. You're not getting any arguments from me on that. The strangeness often gets dismissed as a kind of a madness. People say it's burnout or fragmentation or escapism or something. But what if it's none of those things? What if the weirdness is the point? What if the weirdness is the signal? Like the trumpet calls that were foretold in Bible prophecy, for example. If we see the changing around us is the signal, then it can't be a dysfunction. It means it must be a necessary rite of passage on the path towards our ascension. So no, these are not easy times, and it's natural to feel disoriented. So be kind to yourself. Let intuition be your compass. Remind yourself by saying things like, even if I don't understand this map, I trust that it's taking me in the right direction. Let your relationships soften. Speak gently to others and listen generously. Let other people shape-shift into whatever it is they need to be, and give yourself permission to do exactly the same for yourself. Because no matter how you change, even if you evolve away from what you know, you will also be evolving towards whatever is waiting for you beyond that threshold. And stay curious about all of the contradictions taking place in the world. Don't rush to fix everything, because some things are just unfixable. Remember the spiral analogy. It's not really a spiral so that it resolves issues from the past. It circles back in a spiral so that we can remember and learn from those things. And most importantly, remember the quote from Terence McKenna and his chatty little magic mushrooms. This is what it's like when a species prepares to depart for the stars. Welcome to the new world. This is Ellie Dreams and Under. I love knowing you're here, and I'll see you in my dreams.